Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tale, a quick question. Do you dare wear the fear? Our exclusive Shadows merch is here. Hoodies, tees, and more, designed for those who embrace the darkness. Get yours before they vanish forever. Link below. The Watcher in the Trees, Day 1. Arrival. The sky was a bleeding shade of orange when the truck rumbled up the dirt road, throwing dust in its wake. Thomas Greer adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale beneath a sheen of sweat. "We should have been here hours ago," muttered Ben Carter, his best friend since college. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes scanning the towering evergreens pressing in from both sides. "This place is really out there." Thomas let out a short chuckle. "That's the point. No cell service, no neighbors, just us and the mountains." Behind them, his younger brother, Jacob, groaned. "And the bears. Don't forget the bears." "This place has more than bears," Thomas said absently, watching the shadows shift between the trees. The three of them had rented this cabin deep in the Olympic National Forest for a week, a long overdue getaway from the grind of city life. It wasn't anything fancy. 2 stories, creaky wooden floors, an old fireplace, and an eerie kind of silence that settled over the property like a wool blanket. They unpacked quickly, tossing beer into the fridge and gathering firewood before the night swallowed the forest whole. The only sound was the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of something moving through the underbrush. Ben was the first to mention it. "Did you hear that?" He paused mid-step on the porch, turning his head toward the tree line. Thomas followed his gaze. The trees stood still, their limbs reaching up toward the dimming sky like skeletal fingers. "Probably a deer," Jacob said dismissively, carrying an armful of wood inside. Ben didn't look convinced. By the time they settled in, the darkness outside felt different. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was thick, suffocating. Something about the woods made the cabin feel small, vulnerable. And then came the first sound, a knock. Not on the cabin itself, but from the woods. 3 rhythmic knocks like wood striking wood. Knock, 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 silence. The 3 of them exchanged uneasy glances. "Wind," Thomas muttered, though he knew it wasn't. Day 2. The feeling of being watched. The morning mist curled between the trees like ghostly tendrils, clinging to the damp earth. A thick silence loomed over the forest, broken only by the occasional chirp of unseen birds. Jacob stood at the window, staring at the massive footprints outside. His stomach churned. "Guys, come look at this." Thomas and Ben joined him, their groggy expressions shifting to alarm as they traced the line of deep, inhuman impressions in the mud. Each print was at least 18 inches long, with wide, splayed toes pressed deep into the earth. They led from the edge of the tree line to the side of the cabin, disappearing around the back. Ben exhaled slowly. "That's not normal." Thomas shook his head. "Could be a prank, maybe some hiker messing with us." Jacob swallowed hard. "Then where the hell are our footprints? It rained last night. These are fresh." A tense silence settled between them. The air felt thick, pressing in from all sides. The morning passed in uneasy quiet. They pretended not to think about the footprints, but the feeling of being watched never left. Even inside the cabin, the sensation crawled over their skin, a weight against their backs. By afternoon, they decided to hike deeper into the woods, partly to distract themselves, partly to prove to themselves that there was nothing out there. They walked in a loose line, the trees swallowing them whole. The scent of damp earth and pine filled their lungs, but beneath it, something sour lingered, faint but unmistakable, like decaying leaves or wet fur left to rot. Jacob stopped abruptly. "Did you hear that?" They listened. A sound, low, guttural, somewhere between a growl and a deep, slow exhale, drifted through the trees. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Ben scanned the dense foliage. "It could be a bear," Jacob hesitated. "No, bears huff when they breathe heavy. This is different." Thomas felt his pulse thudding against his ribs. The feeling of being watched was suffocating now, pressing down from all angles. Then, from deeper in the woods, something moved. A massive, shifting silhouette barely visible between the trees. It was standing there, Not running, not hiding, just watching. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. They turned back immediately. That night, no one spoke about what they saw. But the knocking returned. 3 loud, deliberate knocks, not from the trees, but from the back wall of the cabin. Day 3. The stench. The morning came slow and grey. Mist clung to the trees, swirling like breath from some unseen mouth. Everything was damp, too damp. The air felt thick, sticky, like it had been held in a lung for too long before being exhaled back out. Jacob was the first to wake. His throat was dry, his skin clammy. Then he smelled it. A rancid, thick stench filled the cabin. At first it was faint, lingering beneath the usual smells of pine and damp wood. But as he sat up in bed, it grew stronger. Rot, like something had been dead for days. Jacob gagged. He sat up, rubbing his face, trying to shake the grogginess. The floor was cold against his feet as he walked toward the window. He wiped at the condensation on the glass and peered outside. The trees were still. No wind. No movement, but the stench made his stomach churn. From the other room, Ben coughed, hacked, spat. Jesus, his voice was hoarse. What the fuck is that smell? Thomas was already up, standing by the back door, staring outside with a grim look. It's coming from the trees, he murmured. Jacob swallowed back bile. The smell was wet, like an animal carcass left to stew in stagnant water. Then he saw the porch. Dark streaks, something smeared across the wooden railing. Jacob's pulse quickened. Guys, his voice came out weak. Ben followed his gaze, stepping forward, his face drained of color. The railing was stained red. Thick, blackish-red smears stretched along the wood, not splattered, not sprayed, dragged. Thomas moved first. His footsteps were too loud in the silence. The others followed, stopping at the doorway. And then they saw it. A body, or what was left of it. A deer, but the head was missing. Its body lay twisted in the dirt, stomach split wide open. Its insides spilled out like tangled cords, glistening wet and pink in the dull light. The ribs were exposed, gnawed clean in some places. But the worst part, the legs. They were wrong. Bent backward, the bones snapped clean through, as if it had been torn apart and left as a message. Jacob's stomach twisted. He stumbled back, clutching his mouth. Ben took a sharp breath. What the fuck did that? No one answered. Because there in the mud around the carcass were footprints. Not hooves, not paws, feet. Massive, deeply imprinted in the earth. And they led straight to the cabin. Jacob's heart hammered against his ribs. Ben exhaled slowly. I want to leave. And then a crack. Somewhere in the trees, the forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, no life. And then a breath. A deep, wet exhale. Right outside the tree line. Ben took a step back. We're not alone. Then Jacob saw it, a shadow between the trees, watching. He opened his mouth to speak, but the thing moved, fast, too fast, vanishing into the deeper woods. Jacob's body locked up. His lungs stopped working. Thomas turned sharply. Inside, now, they ran. Jacob slammed the door behind them, twisting the lock. His breath came in ragged gulps. Then the knocking started again. Slow, deliberate, not on the door, on the windows. And from outside, a low, wet breathing, something huge, standing just beyond the glass. Day 4, the visitor, they didn't sleep. They couldn't. The knocking lasted until sunrise. Always 3 slow knocks, followed by minutes of horrible silence. Now the air was thick with paranoia. Every creak of the cabin made their heads snap toward the windows. Jacob's hands shook as he packed his bag. We're leaving, he muttered. I don't care if we have to walk, Thomas nodded. We'll take the truck. We just need to, thud. Something heavy hit the roof. Then another, thud, thud, thud. Jacob's stomach twisted. Rocks, Ben's eyes widened. It's throwing rocks at us. A huge one slammed against the wall, rattling the windows. Jacob's breath hitched. It doesn't want us to leave. A shuffling sound came from the porch, slow, purposeful. Something was walking up the steps. And then the doorknob turned. Thomas lunged forward, pressing his weight against the door. The knob rattled violently, as if something huge was testing it. Then, from the window, Jacob saw it. A face, not human. The eyes were too large, like black pits reflecting the dim light. The face was covered in dark, matted fur, and the mouth, it stretched too wide, revealing jagged, yellow teeth. And then it smiled. Jacob killed the lights. They stayed frozen as the thing dragged its fingers down the window, leaving greasy streaks on the glass. Then it stepped off the porch and disappeared into the woods. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind. Day 5, the chase. At first light they ran. The forest felt closer than before. The truck refused to start. Jacob turned, his stomach dropping. The forest was watching them. Then movement. A shadow surged between the trees, its massive frame blurring through the mist. Ben yelled, "Oh, fuck, it's coming." Thomas slammed the gas. The truck lurched forward, kicking up dirt. Then bang. A rock the size of a basketball slammed into the back window. Glass shattered. Another boulder slammed into the side, denting the metal. Then FOOTSDPS. Something was chasing them, keeping pace. Jacob's heart pounded. The trees thinned the highway ahead, and then everything stopped. The truck burst onto the pavement. Jacob turned back. The forest loomed, silent, waiting, but deep in the shadows the eyes were still there, watching. Day 6. The silence before the storm. The highway stretched ahead, an empty ribbon of cracked asphalt winding through the wilderness. The moment they hit the pavement, the pounding footsteps vanished. No more rocks, no more shadows surging through the trees. Just silence. Jacob sat rigid in the passenger seat, his breath shallow. His hands were still trembling. The shattered glass from the back window crunched under his feet as the truck sped forward. Did it stop? Ben's voice was barely above a whisper. Thomas didn't answer. His knuckles were white on the wheel. Jacob forced himself to look back. The tree line stood still, but something was wrong. The trees weren't swaying anymore. The wind had been howling just moments ago, but now the air was dead, like something had swallowed the sound. Jacob swallowed hard. Drive faster. Thomas pressed the gas. The speedometer climbed, 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. No one spoke. The road stretched ahead, twisting through the mountains, and for a moment, Jacob let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd left it behind. Then bang! Something slammed against the roof. The truck jerked. Thomas cursed, gripping the wheel as the whole vehicle lurched to one side. Another thud, this time heavier. Jacob's stomach plummeted. "No," Ben whispered. His eyes were wide, face pale. No, it's not possible." Jacob didn't want to look, but he had to. He turned his head, and from the side mirror he saw it. A massive, ape-like figure crouched on the roof. Its hands were gripping the edges of the truck, thick fingers curling into the metal. The fur covering its arms was black and matted, the muscles bulging beneath. Then, the face. It lowered itself, peering into the broken back window. The eyes were bottomless, black voids, reflecting nothing. The mouth curled back in that same unnatural grin. And then it slammed its fist against the roof. The truck swerved violently. Thomas fought the wheel, tires screeching as they nearly careened into the guardrail. Jacob twisted around. "It's on the goddamn roof." Bang. The roof buckled inward. Ben screamed. The thing pressed down, its weight nearly crushing the frame. Jacob moved on instinct. He grabbed Thomas's shoulder. "Brake." "What? Are you insane?" "Just do it." Thomas slammed the brakes. The tires squealed. Everything lurched forward. The moment the truck jerked to a stop, the thing flew forward. It hit the pavement hard, rolling into the road in a blur of fur and limbs. For a split second, everything was still. Then it moved. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the air as it climbed back onto all fours. Jacob's breath hitched. The thing wasn't running away, it was getting back up, and it was pissed. "G.O.!" Jacob shouted. Thomas slammed the gas. The truck shot forward. The thing roared, its massive arms swinging forward as it lunged, but the truck was already flying down the road. Jacob turned back one last time. The thing stood in the middle of the road, its massive chest heaving, eyes locked onto them. Then, slowly, it tilted its head and smiled, like it was saying, "This isn't over." Day 7. Answers in the dark. They didn't sleep. Not really. After the chase, after the thing had nearly ripped the truck apart, they drove until exhaustion forced them to stop. Now, the three of them sat huddled in a dingy motel room, the neon light from the sign outside flickering through the curtains. The air reeked of mildew and old cigarette smoke, but none of them complained. They were safe, or at least they hoped they were. Jacob sat on the bed, laptop open, fingers frantically scrolling through search results. His hands still shook. The glow from the screen cast sharp shadows across his face. "We need to figure out what the hell we just saw." His voice was hoarse. Thomas paced the room. He hadn't stopped moving since they arrived. His jaw was tight, his hands twitching at his sides. "We all know what we saw. A fucking," he exhaled sharply. "A Bigfoot." Ben was curled up in the armchair by the window, knees pulled to his chest. His voice was flat. "That wasn't just some animal, it knew us." Jacob's stomach twisted, because Ben was right. It had watched them, stalked them, hunted them. And when it had been on the roof of the truck, it hadn't been trying to kill them outright. It had been playing with them. Jacob turned back to the screen. "I don't think it was trying to kill us," he muttered, clicking through article after article. Thomas stopped pacing. "What?" Jacob shook his head. "Think about it. If it just wanted us dead, it could have done it at the cabin. Hell, it could have flipped the truck off the damn road." His throat was dry. "But it didn't," Ben swallowed. "Then what the hell did it want?" Jacob hesitated. Then he found something, an old forum, deep web level old. The kind of site where the text was just slightly off-center and the background was a washed-out gray. The thread was called, "They don't want you to leave." Jacob clicked it, and his blood ran cold. The first post was from 2013. "If you ever go too deep into their territory, they won't just let you walk away. It's not about food. It's not even about fear. It's about control. These things, whatever they are, see the land as theirs. If you cross a certain point, you're not just trespassing, you're challenging them, you're telling them you think you belong there, and they don't forget that." Jacob exhaled sharply. It made sense. They hadn't just stayed in the cabin. They had been walking the trails, exploring, getting comfortable, and somewhere along the way they had crossed a line. He kept scrolling. Another post, this one from 2017. "Leaving isn't enough. If they see you as a challenger, they'll test you. If you run, they'll chase. If you fight, they'll break you. The only way to stop it is to make them believe you were never a threat to begin with." Jacob felt the blood drain from his face. "We made it angry," he whispered. Thomas walked over. "What do you mean?" Jacob swallowed. "It's not just some wild animal, it's territorial, and it sees itself as above us. We stayed too long, acted like we belonged there. We didn't just enter its land, we made it think we were a challenge." Thomas frowned. "So what? We apologize?" Ben scoffed. "Yeah, let's just walk into the woods and say sorry to the 8-foot murder ape." Jacob kept reading. Then something caught his eye, a comment. "They don't always kill. Sometimes if you show submission, true submission, they let you go. You have to prove you were never a challenger, that you're weak." Jacob leaned back, thinking, weak, not a threat. Ben shifted in his seat. "So, if it sees us as weak, it'll leave us alone." Jacob hesitated. "I don't know." Thomas rubbed his temples. "Okay, so if running pissed it off and fighting isn't an option, what the hell do we do?" Jacob looked at the screen again. At the bottom of the thread, one last comment stood out. "If you ever feel like it's watching, don't run, don't fight, just fall to your knees. Lower your head, make your body small, and don't look it in the eyes." Jacob's stomach twisted. "I think I know how to make it stop." Day 8. Back to where it began, the three of them sat in the motel room, the hum of the old AC unit, the only sound cutting through the suffocating silence. Jacob's mind was racing. The forum posts made one thing clear. They had triggered something primal in that thing. They had stepped onto its land, into its domain, and acted like they belonged there. That was the mistake. And if the internet was right, if there was even the slightest chance they could stop this, they had to do the one thing none of them wanted to do, go back. Thomas was the first to speak. "No, absolutely not." His voice was firm, but there was a crack in it, an edge of fear he couldn't hide. Jacob didn't blame him. Ben, still curled in the chair, stared at the laptop screen like it might bite him. "Do you even hear yourself? You're talking about willingly walking back into the place where that thing nearly killed us." Jacob ran a hand down his face. I know how it sounds, but this isn't over." He gestured to the laptop. "The people on that forum, they all say the same thing. If it sees you as a challenge, it won't stop. Running doesn't work. Fighting doesn't work. The only way out is proving we were never a threat." Thomas let out a sharp breath, pacing again. And how the hell do we do that? Jacob turned back to the screen. We go back, we go to the cabin, and we submit. Ben let out a bitter laugh. Oh yeah, great plan. Let's just kneel in front of the monster that chased us off its land and hope it doesn't rip our heads off. Jacob looked at him. What other choice do we have? Silence. Because there was no other choice. The thing wasn't following them. It didn't need to. It was waiting. They had crossed a line, and now it was waiting for them to make their next move. If they didn't act soon, they wouldn't get another chance. Finally, Thomas stopped pacing. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling through his nose. If we do this, we do it right. We bring the truck as close as possible. We go in, we kneel, and we get the hell out. Fast. Jacob nodded. Ben looked between them, jaw clenched. I hate this. Jacob couldn't blame him. Day 9, the return, the drive back to the cabin felt like a funeral procession. The closer they got, the heavier the air became. The woods loomed, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. It felt different now, not just eerie, oppressive, like the forest itself was watching. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky had turned a dull gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds. No birds, no wind, just the distant creak of trees swaying in some unfelt breeze. Thomas cut the engine. No turning back now. Jacob swallowed hard, gripping the door handle. They stepped out. Everything looked the same, but the air was wrong. He could feel it. A weight pressing down on his chest, like he had stepped into something ancient, something alive. They walked forward in silence. Jacob could hear his own heartbeat. The porch groaned under their weight. Thomas hesitated, then pushed the cabin door open. The inside was untouched, but something was off. A smell hung in the air, thick, musky, and faintly metallic, like wet fur and blood. Ben swallowed. Let's just do this. Jacob nodded. They walked to the center of the room. Then they knelt. Jacob lowered his head, his heart hammering. The others followed. They stayed there, waiting. The silence pressed down, growing heavier by the second. Jacob's hands trembled against his thighs. The smell was stronger now. Then a thud. Outside. Jacob's breath caught. Another thud. Closer. Then breathing. Low, deep. Ben made a tiny sound, barely more than a breath. Jacob resisted the urge to look up. The breathing moved. Slow. Deliberate. Then fingers brushed the top of his head. Jacob froze. The fingers lingered, rough and calloused. The nails, thick and cracked, scraped lightly over his scalp. Then they were gone. The breathing retreated. Jacob's pulse roared in his ears. He kept his head down. Then the door creaked, and the presence was gone. Slowly, painfully, Jacob raised his head. Ben was pale as death. Thomas's eyes were wide, face drenched in sweat. Jacob swallowed. His throat was dry. It worked. No one spoke. Then Ben stood, nearly tripping over himself. I'm done. We're done. Let's get the hell out of here. None of them argued. They walked out, every step deliberate. The forest remained still. The truck started without a problem. Jacob looked back one last time, and in the tree line, a shape stood watching. Tall, massive, but it didn't move. And when Jacob blinked, it was gone. You made it back for now. But the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now, too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video. Subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.